Have you ever wondered what happens when your wound is healing? In today's lesson, we're going to talk about 10 different processes that take place in wound healing. So, without any further delay, let's get started with our lesson and make sure to watch until the end. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss a video. Let's get into it. The 10th process, which takes place in wound healing, is hemostasis. Hemostasis is basically the cessation of bleeding. It is the very first step in wound healing, and it starts immediately after the injury occurs. The first thing that happens is the vasoconstriction of the blood vessels. So there's a narrowing of the blood vessels which occurs due to the injury, and this is mediated by the local tissue factors as well as the nerves, and this helps to reduce the blood flow to the area of the wound. The next thing that happens is platelet plug formation. So platelets become activated, and they adhere to the exposed collagen fibers and to the von Willebrand factor. Now, normally, von Willebrand factor acts as a bridge between the collagen and the platelets, and this forms a temporary plug which helps to stop the bleeding. Now, the platelets also release certain chemicals, such as thromboxane, A2, which further helps in the recruitment of more platelets to the site of injury, and this further strengthens the platelet plug. Now, along with the platelet plug, there is also formation of a fibrin meshwork, which is formed by the coagulation factors, and this helps to stabilize the platelet plug and forms a strong framework for the healing tissue. The next process in wound healing is inflammation. Inflammation is a very important process, and it usually starts within the first few hours after the injury, and it continues for several days. So the main purpose of inflammation is to get rid of the harmful stimuli, so the microbes or the cellular debris from the site of injury. It is also meant to set the stage for the next process, that is the proliferation and the tissue repair. So what exactly happens during inflammation? During inflammation, there is an increased blood flow to the site of injury, and this is mediated by the histamine and the other inflammatory mediators. So because of the increased blood flow, there is redness and heat at the site of injury. The next thing that happens is the migration of the white blood cells to the site of injury. So the neutrophils and the macrophages are the first cells to arrive at the site of injury, and they help to get rid of the harmful stimuli, such as the microbes or the cellular debris. They do this by phagocytosis, by releasing antimicrobial substances, and also by releasing proteolytic enzymes. And the last thing that happens during inflammation is the release of growth factors. These growth factors play an important role in the next process, that is the proliferation. The 8th process in wound healing is the proliferation phase. Proliferation is basically the formation of new tissue, and it starts after the inflammation, and it continues for several weeks. So during the proliferation phase, there is deposition of new extracellular matrix, and this is done mainly by the fibroblasts, and this forms the granulation tissue. The granulation tissue is basically the new tissue that is formed during wound healing, and it has a lot of blood vessels, and this helps to supply nutrients to the healing tissue. The next thing that happens during the proliferation phase is angiogenesis. So new blood vessels are formed at the site of injury, and this is mediated by the vascular endothelial growth factor, and this again helps to supply oxygen and nutrients to the healing tissue. The next thing that happens during proliferation is the formation of a new epithelium. So in case of a cut on the skin, the epithelial cells start to migrate from the edges of the wound, and this helps to cover the granulating tissue, and this forms the new skin covering. Now, along with all these things, there is also remodeling of the collagen. So initially, when the collagen is formed, it is randomly deposited, but later it is remodeled into a more organized pattern, and this is done by the fibroblasts, and this helps to increase the tensile strength of the wound. As healing progresses, fibroblasts remodel this collagen into a more organized lattice. Over time, much of the type 3 collagen is replaced with type 1 collagen, which has much greater tensile strength. Okay, the 7th process in wound healing is epithelialization. Epithelialization is basically the formation of a new epithelium, and this starts during the proliferation phase, and it continues until the wound is completely covered by new epithelium. So how does epithelialization occur? Epithelialization occurs by two mechanisms. One is the migration of epithelial cells from the edges of the wound, and the second one is the proliferation of epithelial cells from the existing epithelium. So once the epithelial cells migrate to the center of the wound, they start to multiply, and this helps to cover the entire wound surface. All right, the 6th process in wound healing is the remodeling of collagen. Remodeling of collagen is basically the reorganization of collagen fibers, and it starts during the proliferation phase and it continues for several months. So during remodeling, the collagen fibers are realigned along the lines of stress, and this is done by the fibroblasts, and this increases the tensile strength of the wound. Okay, the fifth process in wound healing is wound contraction. Wound contraction is basically the narrowing of the wound, and this is done by the myofibroblasts, and it starts during the proliferation phase and it continues until the wound is closed. So wound contraction is important because it brings the edges of the wound closer together, and this helps the epithelial cells to meet in the middle and close the wound. The fourth process in wound healing is the action of enzymes. Enzymes play an important role in wound healing, and they are released by various cells such as the neutrophils, macrophages, and fibroblasts. So enzymes are released during the inflammatory and the proliferative phases of wound healing, and they help in various processes, such as the breakdown of fibrin and collagen, the activation of growth factors, and the synthesis of new tissue. All right, the third process in wound healing is the action of growth factors. Growth factors are basically proteins that stimulate the growth and division of cells, and they play an important role in wound healing. So growth factors are released during the inflammatory and the proliferative phases of wound healing, and they stimulate the growth of fibroblasts, endothelial cells, and epithelial cells, and this helps in the formation of new tissue, new blood vessels, and new epithelium. Okay, the second process in wound healing is the action of cytokines. Cytokines are basically small proteins that are involved in cell signaling, and they play an important role in wound healing. So cytokines are released during the inflammatory and the proliferative phases of wound healing, and they regulate the immune response, the inflammatory response, and the growth of new tissue. Some examples of cytokines are interleukins, interferons, and tumor necrosis factor. And the last process in wound healing is the action of extracellular matrix. Extracellular matrix is basically the material that surrounds and supports the cells, and it plays an important role in wound healing. So the extracellular matrix is composed of various components such as collagen, elastin, and fibronectin. And this provides a framework for the healing tissue, and it also helps to regulate the growth and the differentiation of cells. Over time, the ECM undergoes remodeling. Random collagen type 3 is gradually replaced with type 1. Fibers become aligned along tension lines. This makes the tissue stronger and more durable. What was the most amazing process about the wound healing? Please write it down in the comments. So these are the 10 processes that take place in wound healing. And if you like this video, then make sure to like, subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications and share this video with everyone you know for more content. Thank you for watching and see you next time.